Mallory Whitfield, author of We Are the Weird Ones. And the most impactful piece of advice or wisdom that I've ever heard is that trauma that is not transformed gets transferred.
Ooh. So, Mallory, who told you that? Where did you learn that, and how's that served you?
Yeah, so it was actually via a podcast, coincidentally. The podcast, The Hilarious World of Depression. Not sure if you're
Oh, that
familiar.
sounds fun.
It actually is. So they interview a lot of comedians and different celebrities who struggle with different mental health issues. And there's so many good episodes, but this particular episode, it was with Andrew Zimmern, who hosts the Bizarre Food
Yep.
Show on the Travel Channel. And so he's a recovering alcoholic, drug addict, and he stated that. He said, trauma that is not transformed gets transferred. And it feels like another way of saying the phrase hurt people, right? And it's like as soon as he said it, it was like I just got like hit upside the head because I was going through a lot of personal stuff at the time. And I was actually going through a really big breakup with my long-term partner and kind of, seeing trauma in other people, seeing trauma in myself, and seeing how like when we have these issues that we're going through and these experiences, and if we haven't started to do the work to unpack our own experiences, start to heal from our experiences, going to therapy or whatever that journey looks like for us, because it's always individual. But if we haven't started to go on that journey at all, how it often ends up just becoming this pressure cooker of like we pass on our own pain to other people. And I feel like if we would all do more of that internal work and get comfortable being uncomfortable, maybe the world would be a little bit of a better place.
Yeah. Wow. I love that. That's great. And cool that it was on a podcast from a chef giving life advice. I mean, I think that's so interesting, right? And that's often where our best advice comes from, like kind of random places, right? Not places that we're expecting, like in a book often, although certainly books can help us. But it's so interesting, right, that would happen. So The Hilarious World of Depression sounds like, a challenging listen, but probably making it funny. I mean, I know whenever I'm really uncomfortable, I try to make people laugh. So that's one of my ways of dealing with it. So that's kind of one of my weird things, right? And I think that's a weird thing that maybe I do. But Mallory, how do you define weird?
Well, so the way that I define weird in this sense, in the book, and in the work that I do, it's more of like, what's unique and special about us, right? Because I feel like whether we use the word weird, whether we identify as weird, we might use other words instead. But I feel like in some way, shape, or form, we've all felt like an outsider or like we didn't belong at some point in our lives in some circumstance, right? Whether that's on the regular or just occasionally we like have moments where we feel like we don't fit in, or, like we feel like we're like the wallflower in a group. But our weird is that thing or that combination of things usually that makes us who we are, right? It's our lived experiences, it's our interests, it's all the things that make us slightly unique and different from everybody else, even though we all have so many things in common because we all have our common humanity. When we all start to explore and really get curious about each other, we start to realize like how much we really do have in common, even if it's somebody who lives on the other side of the world. Like we're all human, but we also have a combination of experiences that even if you're twins, you're not going to have the exact same lived experience as your twin, right? You have so much more in common with them than anybody else, even genetically, but you still have your own set of things that make you uniquely you. And that's your weird. And that's what we should embrace in ourselves and in each other.
So when did you first embrace your weird? Because this is a concept. I mean, I love this, right? I sometimes, I always challenge people, right, to think about what's your weird, because I think we all have something as well, right? And so when did you first maybe encounter your weird, and when did you finally embrace your weird and actually get comfortable with it and not just, I don't want to tell anybody about this weirdness?
I think to some extent maybe my superpower and my weird is that I've generally been pretty comfortable embracing it. I definitely had those moments during middle school. I think that most of us do, where there's that rocky patch of just wanting to really fit in. But actually, around that time, I think is when it became very apparent to me how weird I was. This, my Jeff Goldblum behind me, in case you noticed, was definitely a moment of realizing what a weird, strange child I was. So I was obsessed with Jeff Goldblum ever since I saw Jurassic Park when it first came out in theaters in '93. And I got so obsessed with him that I created this like handwritten catalog of all of his movies. I basically copied the entire list from the Internet Movie Database of all of his characters, all of his movies, and I had this color coded star chart of like, did I own the movie on VHS? Had I seen the movie? And then what would my relationship with Jeff Goldblum's character in the movie be? So I had different colors of stars that I would write, oh, I would date his character in this movie, or I would marry his character in this movie, or like all of the above. And then in eighth grade, I printed out a picture from his 1986 sci-fi horror classic, The Fly. And in case anyone listening is not familiar with The Fly, so in The Fly, Jeff Goldblum plays this scientist who's trying to build a teleportation device, right? And for some reason, in order to test out a teleportation device, you have to get completely naked to test this thing out.
Who knew?
That's what happens in the movie. I don't understand that part. I don't think they ever explain it. But there's this very infamous shot of him inside of this sort of like honeycomb shaped teleportation device at the open door of it. And he's crouched naked and his thigh is like covering his toolywag so you can't see anything, but he's just buck naked. And for whatever reason, my eighth grade, like 12-year-old self decides to print this picture out and bring it into class.
Of course.
Yeah. My teacher's like, Mallory, this is pornography of Jeff Goldblum. Like, you can't have this in middle school. And I was like, yeah, there's, I don't think I'm like normal kids or other kids.
Yeah. That's interesting, right? I mean, that's so interesting. And that embracing that, right? And instead of being shameful, instead embracing that, I think those are things that, you know, we certainly have control over. And certainly, you know, if we believe that we have control over it, if we believe we have agency to do that, I think it helps us a lot. But I got to ask, what's your favorite Jeff Goldblum movie? Is it The Fly or what? Jurassic Park or what?
Jurassic Park is always on my top list of like favorite movies in general. I could watch that movie over and over. I think my favorite ones are the ones like Jurassic Park where I would watch it even if Jeff Goldblum wasn't in it. And so my other probably top one next to that is Earth Girls Are Easy.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, from like the late 80s with Jim Carrey and Gina Davis. And it's so 80s Southern California and ridiculous. I love that movie so much.
That's awesome. That's awesome. I just realized he was in the Grand Budapest Hotel, which is super fun, right? That was a super odd movie. And for those listening and watching, that's a movie. If you're thinking, boy, I want to be more weird, that's definitely a movie that'll do it, right? I mean, what do you think about that movie?
It's been a while since I've seen that one, but yeah, any of those Wes Anderson movies definitely have an element of weird to them.
Cool. All right. Well, cool. Well, you have 4 kind of dimensions of weirdness here on your wheel of weird. And when I put you back full screen, folks will see that. But I love this, right? Because there's 4 different pieces here that we can cultivate: curiosity, compassion, authenticity, and action. Let's take these apart here. Curiosity, Mallory. Tell me what does this mean to you? And then how do we develop our curiosity so we can embrace some more of our weirdness?
Yeah, so I always look at curiosity as like the starting place. So the curiosity component is the first part that I introduce of the Wheel of Weird. And whether it's about exploring ourselves and sort of those parts of ourselves that maybe we've pushed down or, you know, felt ashamed about or tried to hide from others, felt like they were too weird for public consumption. Or if it's getting curious about other people's lived experience, wanting to be more inclusive. I think curiosity is a really great starting point, because when we're actively curious about something, we're not really judgmental. And so I sort of see curiosity as like the flip side to being judgmental, whether that's making judgments about ourselves or making judgments about other people. And so much of curiosity is about asking questions, right? It's like reverting to that 5-year-old kid self that I know I'm not a parent, but I know a lot of parents might find annoying in children, that habit of asking, why? But I think that's a beautiful thing that children do. And I wish that more adults would embrace that, is to really question about so many things, like why do we do these things, or why do we believe these things, even just paying more attention, being more mindful about those judgments that come up, whether they're the judgments towards ourselves or judgments about other people. Like as those judgments come up, noticing and saying, like, yeah, why do I believe that, or why am I having that reaction towards this person or towards this idea that's coming up in my mind, you know?
Yeah, yeah, awesome. So it goes beyond kind of just understanding, right? It goes into why is it the case, and I think that's really powerful, and I think that helps us kind of be more inclusive, right? I know that the kind of the theme of your book is about inclusivity, and that's really the theme of all your work, is about a more inclusive world, and I think it's great that you start there, because questioning ourselves of why is a great way to say, how does this serve me, right? How does this belief, how does this idea, how does this, whatever, this action, this reaction, how does it serve me? I think that helps us a bunch. So how did you come upon curiosity, Mallory? Like, how did you realize that was the first one?
Again, I think there's an element of like, maybe in some way this is another part of my own one of my own strengths and superpowers. I don't know if you're familiar with Gretchen Rubin's The Four Tendencies.
Sure.
But there's the questioner is one of them, right? And I definitely identify as the questioner. Like I need to know as much or all the information before I do a thing, before I'm really like bought into an idea. And I think me as that person who's always questioning, living in the world, I start to notice like, oh, not all of us are questioning those things as much. And I think for myself too, once I started to question things about my own experiences. So like one example of something I started to get really curious about for myself, I grew up in southern Mississippi on the Mississippi Gulf Coast. And even growing up there in Mississippi, I would sometimes have people ask where I was from. Like they didn't think I was from there because I didn't have a strong southern accent as far as they could tell. And I started to wonder, like, why do people keep asking me this question? This is so strange that I keep getting asked this question, even from people who live in the same place that I grew up in, right? And I was like, why is this? And I did a lot of theater growing up, so I'm sure that has something to do with sort of like being able to adapt to different voices and accents. But I started to wonder, like, did I somehow kind of neutralize my voice because I realized that there were these judgments, these preconceived ideas about what it means to be Southern and to sound like you're from the South, right? Because if you look at the newscasters or people in media, it's like usually people with very strong Southern accents, they're either portrayed as being kind of stupid and backwards, not too smart, or they're portrayed as being racist, or they're like, there's like all of these negative connotations seem to be what I was ingesting growing up about what it means to be Southern. And so I started to think about that and like, why didn't I have a Southern accent? And then since then I've started to like be more curious in general about like, what does that mean about my own experience growing up? And I think that's one of those starting places for curiosity that I think can be a great place, is to think about like what are our experiences of how we grew up, and how is that different, and how would my life and how would my perspective on the world be different had I grown up under different circumstances, right? Because the opposite of weird is normal, or we say that it's normal, right? But like, what does normal even mean? I think the last couple of years have really enlightened us that normal never existed as a singular definition, right? Like the last couple of years since COVID, we're all like, oh, I would just want things to get back to normal. But we're also seeing all the ways in which like normal for some of us wasn't normal or good, or, you know, something that we should be valuing Like it's not normal isn't an equal definition across the board. What's normal for
Yeah.
somebody like me who lives in New Orleans is completely different than what's normal for somebody who lives in Tokyo, Japan or Paris, France, right?
Absolutely. Yeah, you make that point super clear in the book. I love that. You go deeper into that and how that makes sense. And I would say, to your point about normal, right? Normal, I would argue, is defined by our surroundings. And so if we, like you and I are speakers, right? Some people say that the biggest fear is public speaking. Well, if we're hanging out with a bunch of speakers, that's not true. In fact, I would argue the one person that's in the group that is afraid of speaking would be like, "Hey, weirdo, what's the deal? Like, you're a speaker. Don't be afraid." And so I think, we have to remember that because we bring, our baggage with us, right? We bring that, say, well, this is normal to me, but that may not be normal to you. So I love that, Mallory. I think that's great. And I think that connects great with your next one here, one of your other ones, and that's authenticity, and one that I think a lot of people miss, right? We say, oh, be authentic, but what the heck does that mean to Mallory, and why is that so important?
Yeah, I mean, I think what it means to be authentic is different for everybody, right? Because we're all individuals. We all have our own weird or whatever makes us us. We all have our own lived experiences. But I think so often it is really hard to show up authentically or even for ourselves, really embrace everything that we want to be. Because there are so many messages in the world that tell us, like, it's not okay to do this or to be this or to act this way, right? Or certain types of behavior or certain types of people are prioritized or put on a pedestal or given special advantages or privileges or whatever, depending on the circumstance. And so it can be really hard to show up as your fully authentic self in all of the different components that make you, right? But I think trying to first for ourselves, like, get curious about like what that could look like if we were able to bring our full authentic selves into the world, into communications with people who are close to us. Like friends and family can sometimes almost be the hardest. Like it seems like it should be the easiest to show up as our full authentic selves, and sometimes that can be the hardest depending on our own relationships with those people, right? Especially family sometimes. What might it look like to be able to be our full authentic selves at work or in the world? And I know for some of us that is easier than for others, depending on our own specific set of advantages and privileges, right? And then also think about, based on that, like, what would it look like if all of us were able to be our full authentic selves, right? And like, how could we be better allies to other people to help them be able to safely, both physically safely and safely on a psychological level, like, right, like feel safe to show up as their full authentic selves, right?
Mm-hmm.
There's so much to that, but I think I think the middle ground, actually, the way I usually talk about the wheel of weird, compassion actually comes in between how I introduce curiosity and then authenticity. And I think that can be a good bridge between the two, because I think in order to show up as our full authentic selves, to bring our full authentic selves into the world, whether that's in workplace settings or, larger environments, or in those interpersonal relationships with friends and family and loved ones, often that requires showing ourselves self-compassion, right? Being kinder and gentler to ourselves, and knowing that we don't have to be perfect, but also recognizing that other people are human and they don't have to be perfect either, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Absolutely. I think that's great. And I was just going to ask about that, because I do think, I purposely skipped past compassion because that connection is so important, right? I agree with you, right? If we're introducing it, I would go your way as well. But I think it's important to understand, what is authentic for you is maybe not authentic for me, right? Like, for instance, I wear bright colors and I have colorful glasses. That's not a big deal, but I will tell you, when I first did, that was a really freaking big deal. And I bet for you, right? I mean, you have blue hair, right? And that was probably one of the first things that people were like, Mallory, what is going on with that? So how did you embrace that? Because I'll tell you, for me, I just kind of was like, well, I like these colors and they're good for me. So if you like them too, that's great. And if not, well, that's okay as well. So what about you?
Um, yeah, I mean, yeah, I did. I dyed my hair blue in high school, which was
Yeah.
like a big deal because my dad
Yeah.
was very like, people will judge you, right? He's very traditional Southern Mississippi kind of guy, and the thing that I realized later about that judgment about being able to show up authentically is like, yeah, if I dyed my hair blue, people would judge me, or if I shaved my head, like I have half of my head shaved, right? Yeah, people will judge you, but that judgment can be a litmus test, right? Because some people are going to judge you negatively for having blue hair or a shaved head or wearing bright colors. But there's going to be other people that judge you positively for the exact same thing, right? And I think, I my background's in marketing, and in marketing, we talk a lot about like you have to have a strong brand. A strong brand is also is often at least somewhat divisive. A really strong brand is usually polarizing to some extent. There's in order for people to love you, there's also going to have to be people on the other side that really don't like you or hate you,
Yeah.
right? And as much as we might want everybody to love our brand or ourselves as individual people, that's unrealistic. And so I think, yeah, part of that exploration, part of being able to embrace and live out loud our authentic selves, to show up with bright colors or shaved head or whatever that looks like for you. I think it's, again, getting comfortable with being uncomfortable in that not you're not for everybody and everybody's not for you, and that's okay. But also, I mean, back to the point of being inclusive, like just because we don't like the same things as everybody else or we don't agree with everybody else doesn't mean we can't respect other people, right? And I think that's one of those things that uh, we have trouble reconciling that nuance these days. It seems like in a lot of different aspects of conversation and discourse is like there's a lot of issues that become so black and white, become so polarized as like it has to be all this way or all that way. But like life is shades of gray, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I love that you repeated getting comfortable being uncomfortable. I think that's a super awesome lesson for all of us, right? If we want to embrace our weirdness, we have to really get comfortable with the uncomfortableness. And that could be, you are different. And frankly, you are different. If you're listening to this, if you're watching this, if you're like, hey, they're just like me. Well, we're just like you and probably a lot different too. So I think that's a super great lesson. So Mallory, bring us home here with the action, because I love to close conversations with action, right? Like, what actions do we need to take, and how do we get started on this journey towards embracing our weird and on accepting that we are, in fact, the weird ones?
Yeah. So the action part of the Wheel of Weird, when I first started talking about this and started working on writing, it was originally called allyship, right? Because a lot of what I do is around diversity, inclusion, belonging. And allyship is a big part of that, to be an ally to somebody else. But the more I really started thinking about it, especially with everything that's happened in the last few years, I think we've seen where it can be really easy for somebody to sort of try to label themselves as an ally to someone else, to a different, person or group of people, and just check that off the off the list and try to be done with it. And that's not really the point. Like there should be actions that you're taking to try to be more inclusive, to try to create more belonging for other people. Um, and through those actions, you become an ally. But it's not just about calling yourself an ally. You have to actually do things, right? And but the allyship part is also about being an ally to ourselves, because I think so much of this work is both internal and directed inward and getting uncomfortable and doing the sort of self exploration to become better, more fully realized people, and think about like how we show up for ourselves and others in the world. And so some of that action when it comes to the own self, ourselves, might be things like going to therapy, right? Or journaling about some of those things that you're curious about, some of that maybe the unconscious bias, like what are the things that I might think differently about had I been raised under different circumstances, if I had been born, a different gender or a different in a different part of the world, how might I think differently about things? Journaling about that kind of stuff can be a great place to start for examining and getting curious about ourselves. And then taking action to be more inclusive of others is that's such a big topic. We could have a whole conference about that, and there would be plenty of experts that we could bring in. And actually, I'll share another couple of experts, because I've learned so much from other people, right? Because I think we're all, if we're trying to be more inclusive of other people, if we're trying to create a kind of more inclusive world for everyone, like we're all on our own journey and we're all experts in our own lived experience. But I think it's important to look to other people with different sets of experiences to learn from about their own experiences, right? And someone that I really love, who I follow her on Instagram, and I think she's on TikTok and there's a bunch of other places. She's written amazing books, is Blair Imani. And she has this great series of these sort of Instagram reels and TikToks called Smarter in Seconds. And she's also written a book, I think it's called Read This to Get Smarter, about, I don't remember the exact title, but it's about like race and class and disability and gender. And she's brings in a lot of other experts herself with all sorts of different lived experiences and backgrounds. And I love following her because it's fun, but educational. It's like a little bit of like PBS on your Instagram feed. And so, yeah, like exposing yourself to more people of more backgrounds and just listening with an open heart and open mind. Because that's really been part of my journey, is like the more that I had just really vulnerable, curious conversations with other people who were very different than me, who had very different, backgrounds and experiences, I started to realize, all of the ways in which my own experience was different than theirs, and how I wanted to take actions, whether that's things like donating to certain nonprofits that are doing work to create a better situation for a specific group, or whether that's writing to my congressman or senator or my mayor or whatever, like whatever the action is, that all starts from a place of like having conversations with other people who are different and sort of starting to understand their experience, starting to have that compassion towards, what they've experienced and how that might be different than things that I've experienced. And seeing these like amazing people from all different backgrounds and wanting them to be able to show up as their full authentic self, right? Hearing stories about ways in which people that I've met like haven't been able to show up as their full authentic selves in the world, because that is not always safe for everybody, unfortunately, right? And so how do I take action towards making that better? I mean, there's so many different directions, and I think we're all going to have different causes or different aspects of things, right? I sometimes have the feeling of like wanting to do all of the things all of the time, and that's just not reasonable. I think we kind of have to like figure out like what are the causes or what are the specific issues that are important to me, and how do I use my specific skill set, my specific strengths and sets of experiences, my weird, how do we take that and use that to take action and make the world a better place.
Awesome. Awesome. Great suggestions, Mallory. I love that you encourage us to start with that curious heart, right? Be open with a heart, be open with your mind, and then getting involved with something you're passionate about to use your weird for good. I think that's a great place for folks. Now, folks, if you're listening, you're watching, you're like, hey, who the heck's Mallory Whitfield? I got to get to know her. Go to get a copy of the book, right? Go to MalloryWhitfield.com. Get We Are the Weird Ones. Embrace your weird for a kinder, more inclusive world. If you want to get to know her, a little more sample of Mallory, follow her on Instagram, Mallory.Whitfield. And Blair Amani is an interesting new find for me, who I'm certainly going to follow. I did a quick Google search there so I could make sure I spelled that right. Blair, Blair. Last name is Amani, Imani. Good reminder. And the last thing, as we kind of take us out here, Mallory, is getting comfortable being uncomfortable. I think that's a great place for folks to start, right? If this conversation made you a little uncomfortable, hey, go get the book. Figure it out, right? Embrace your weird. Get to know Mallory and get to know yourself, because a lot of the work is internal work. Mallory, thanks so much for being with me today. I really appreciate you.
Thank you so much, Phil.
Absolutely. And thanks everyone for watching, for listening. Till next time, go embrace your weird.